Quick review of what we've learned about sight singing. Here's our diatonic scale. And you remember that the dia is from the Greek for two. It's called diatonic because there are two kinds of intervals in that scale. We've got whole steps and half steps. Mostly whole steps. Welcome. Mostly whole steps. But there are two half steps, and I've indicated those with the arrows in your on this diagram. They are between mi and fa, and they are between ti and do. If those half steps are not in those places, it won't sound like a major scale. We talked about that last week when we introduced minor. The reason the minor sounds minor is because the half steps are in different places. We'll get to that in a second. All right, everything else besides those two half steps is a whole step. So let's take a look. We've got our Kerwin hand signs, and I put the little arrows in the same places between mi and fa and between ti and do. And then, as we've said, the signs themselves remind us where the half steps are because fa points down to mi, that's a half step, and ti points up to do, that's a half step. Those are the only two signs that point, if we have to raise so and make si, for example, then it points up because we've turned that into a half step. And then fa, if we can point it up and make fi, we'll do that in a minute when we get to harmonic minor. But those two signs, fa points down to mi because that's where one half step lives, and then ti points up to do because that's where the other half step lives. So let's do that together. Let me get us a nice pitch here. It's afternoon, so we can start right here. This is going to be do. Let's try it together. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. And so many things that we sing do have scale-like sections in them, but also the arpeggio sections where we leave out sort of every other tone. When we have do, mi, so, mi, do, and then sometimes we have so, do. Do that with me. Do, mi, so, mi, do, so, do. Very good. Now we've reviewed pitch really fast. Let's move on to rhythm. All right, so these are the divisions of rhythm that we've talked about. There are more. Of course, we can go even smaller than that, but we're not going to because hymns rarely have any notes smaller than what you see up here. So we've got our whole note or semibrev, which is 4 counts. And so when we count that, we go ta, ah. We've got our half note or minim, which is 2 counts. And we clap that, we go ta-ah. And we have a quarter note or a crotchet, which is 1 count. So when we do that, we clap that, we go ta. The 8th note or quaver is a half a count. So it takes 2 of those to make 1 quarter note. So that would be ti, ti in the space of 1 ta. We're going to clap all these together in just a second. And then the semiquaver or the 16th note is a fourth of a quarter note. It takes 4 of those to make 1 quarter note. So that would be tika tika in the space of 1 ta. As we'll see on the rhythm tree, let's look at a rhythm tree and clap those rhythms. So we're going to start at the top of the tree and we're going to work our way down to the bottom. Then we're going to go back up to the top and then we'll go back down a second time. So start at the top, go down to the bottom, go back up to the top, and then go back to the bottom again. So we're starting on a whole note, which is ta-ah-ah-ah. This is going to be our tempo. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Ta-ah-ah-ah, ta-ah, ta-ah, ta-ta-ta-ta, ti-ti-ti-ti-ti-ti-ti-ti, tika 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 ti 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 ta 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 ta, down again, ta, 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 ti, tika, 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 tika. So you see how those things all relate to each other, right? All right. Now, remember we had some special kinds of rhythmic patterns, so we need to review those quickly as well. These are our dotted rhythms. That dot next to the note adds half of the note's value back to the note. So the quarter note is 1 beat, so that means that dot would be worth 1/2 a beat, which makes the dotted quarter note 1.5 beats. And so then when we add that eighth note next to it, which is 1/2 a beat, then those two together equal 2, right? Because 1.5 plus 1/2, I know there's math. 1.5 plus 1/2 equals 2. And so in a measure, these bars have 4 counts each. So in this first example, we have dotted quarter, eighth, dotted quarter, eighth. That's 1.5 plus 1/2 plus 1.5 plus 1/2, which equals 4. And the second one is our dotted eighth, 16th rhythm. So an eighth note is 1/2 a count. So we add 1/2 of that. 1/2 of 1/2 is a quarter. So that's 3/4 of a count, which means we add that extra 16th note to equal 1 count. So dotted eighth plus a 16th together equal 1 count. Let's clap. This would be our quarter note pace. So the first example would be like this. Tom, ti, tom, ti, tom, ti, tom. Do that with me. Tom, ti, 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 tom, ti. All right, that's a dotted quarter eighth note rhythm. Tim, ka-tim, 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 ka. Started it slower than I usually do. Do that with me. Ready? And tim, ka-tim, 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 ka. All right, so those are the 16th notes. Ba, 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 tim, ka-tim, ka-tim, ka-tim. All right? Now, there's other ways we could break a beat down, but that's in hymn singing. Sometimes you'll have like where you have where it divides into 3 instead of into 2 or 4, but that's something that you can feel that when that happens. All right, the next thing that we talked about was syncopation, and syncopation is when notes occur off the beat, ahead of the beat, and syncopation looks like this. So if that's a quarter, this would be syncopa, 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 syncopa. So you hear how the co comes out of my mouth before I clap the next beat, right? It's ahead of the beat. Syncopa, syncopa, syncopa. Like that. Let's try that together. This is our quarter note beat. And ready, go. Syncopa, 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 syncopa. Good deal. All right, then we look at meter signature or time signature. Let's look at that now. Nothing difficult here. It's just numbers. The top number tells you how many beats are in a bar, and then the bottom number tells you what kind of note receives 1 beat. Now, that can be a little confusing, because when you look at that bottom number, think about fractions. Think about fractions. So you see that 4 on the bottom. Think about 1/4. Okay, don't think about 4. A lot of times, especially with younger students, they'll see the 4 and they'll think about a whole note, because they know that a whole note has 4 counts. And they'll think, oh, that means it's 3 whole notes. No, it's the 4 is on the bottom, so it's like a fraction. So think about fourths, 3 quarter notes. If the whole note was getting the beat, then we'd put a 1 on the bottom, okay? Just like we would do in fractions, right? So if a half note gets the beat, we put the 2 on the bottom. So in this example, the top note tells us there's 3 beats in a bar, and the bottom number tells us that there are the quarter note gets one beat or one count. All right, now let's have one last look at keys. And we talked about this, and we talked about how this works when we change keys. Every time we go up by 5 notes from C, we have to raise T by a half step. So if you look going clockwise on this wheel, every time you move from noon to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, we're going up by 5 notes from C. And every time we do that, we raise what would be T in the new key by a half step. So in the key of G, we got one raised note. We raise F to F sharp because that's going to be our T in the key of G. So we look at that. Whatever that last sharp is T in that key. So we just go up one half step from that, and that tells us what key we're in. Going the other direction is when we go down by 5 notes from C, and we learned that when we do that, we have to lower Fa by a half step. So that's another reason that T points up and Fa points down. Because every time we go up by 5 notes from C, we raise T a half step. Every time we go down 5 notes from C, we lower Fa by a half step. So that means on the way around counterclockwise, that last flat, the lowered note, that last flat is going to be Fa, which means that the next to last flat tells us the name of the key, except in the case of F, which only has the one flat. But then you can just go Fa, Mi, Re, Do. Okay, that's F, right? All right, so that's how keys work. Now, question that we didn't answer was, well, why do we have to write things in different keys? I've had students ask me that before. Why do we have to write things in other keys? Why can't we just write everything in C, where we don't have any flats or sharps? And I'll throw that one out here to you. Why do we have all these different keys? Because. All right, thank you, Tim. I was just ready for this profundity, and thank you. Yes. Yeah, Stephanie. Yeah, I mean, my voice can only go so low, and it can only go so high, right? And that's true of everybody, and we have different ranges in our voices. And so if you're writing a song, you're writing a piece of music, it's going to sound different. If you're talking about instrumental music, it's going to sound different in different keys. And so if you want a particular sound, you're gonna choose the key that corresponds to what you have in your head. But then if you're thinking about singers, it has to be in a certain range for the singers. And so, that will determine what key something is in too. Yeah. Hello. Welcome. All right, so the last thing we looked at music-wise was minor keys. Let's go there. Yes? Well, sometimes. Composers of Broadway musicals hate pianists because you don't know how many numbers and how many shows are in like F sharp or C sharp. It's like, why? It happens all the time. So, and of course, string players complain if there are any flats whatsoever. So they're convinced that that composers hate them too. Let's go ahead and talk about minor. So we started out with a C major scale, and so that was Do right there. And then if we go down to La, Do, Ti, La, and we start at La, we go La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La. The half steps are still between Ti and Do and between Mi and Fa, but because we started lower and ended lower, it shifted where they were in the scale, and the scale has a different sound to it. La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La. Sing that with me. La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La. that's a natural minor scale. Now, sometimes when we sing melodies or we write melodies, we change something in the minor scale, and we'll look at that now. All right, so this is a harmonic minor scale. And what we have done here is we want to have a leading tone at the end to make the harmony stronger. And we want to have that leading tone like we do in major key. So we raise what was so. We raise it a half step to C, not C, the letter C, but S-I-C. We raise it a half step so that we have a leading tone going back up to La. So in the natural minor we had La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La. In harmonic minor we have La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Si, La. All right, so we have Si, La instead of Si, La. We have Si, La. All right, try that with me. Here's La. La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Si, La. So you hear that and it creates that kind of weird augmented second from Fa to Si. Fa, Si, La, which is kind of like a stretched interval that gives us that leading tone that we sometimes need.